boat left the mainland, the shore of the mainland, and went to their new home, to the lighthouse. And they were in a boat. And as they were going from here to here, they met a fisherman in another boat, fisherman's own boat. And the fisherman was kind of weird. He didn't talk much. And he didn't help them much either. So I just wanted to remind you of that weird little fisherman. We might see him again. So, okay, they're on the island. They're at their new home. They just arrived. And little Mai, you remember little Mai? Little Mai is Moomin Ch's sister. And she sat on the lighthouse steps watching the dawn. Below her, the island lay in the half light, looking like a big gray cat stretching itself with its claws spread out. Hey, you got a cat, don't you? You can picture that. Your cat's got a great name. It's like two names, right? You should let me know what that is. So that when we talk about the island looking like a cat, I can think of your cat. Francois? Is that your cat's name? It's two names, right? Anyway, you'll let me know. And both the cat's paws, this is the island looking like a cat, both the cat's paws were resting on the sea. And its tail was a long, narrow point, a point at the other end of the island. The cat's back was bristling, but its eyes were invisible. And little Mai said, this is no ordinary island. It goes down to the bottom of the sea quite differently from the other islands. I bet things happen here. I think little Mai is Maggie's favorite character. Little Mai huddled up and waited. The sun came up over the sea, and shadows and colors began to appear. The island began to take shape and draw in its claws. Everything began to shine, and the chalk white seagulls, these birds that are associated with oceans, circled over the point. The cat vanished, but right across the island lay the shadow of the lighthouse, like a broad, dark ribbon stretching down to the beach where the boat was. And there they all were, far below her, like small ants. Moomin Papa and Moomin Ch carrying as much as they could, striding out of the bushes and into the shadow of the lighthouse. There they became even smaller and stopped, three little white dots turning their noses upward to look up at what was above them. I got a picture here. Do you see by the doorway, you see a little figure there? That's little Mai. And then at the bottom are Moomin Papa, Moomin Mama, and Moomin Ch. And little Mai is sitting up there by the door at the bottom of the lighthouse, waiting for them to join her. And Moomin Mama froze to the spot and said, "Oh, how big it is." And Moomin Papa shouted, "Big? It's enormous. It's probably the biggest lighthouse that has ever been built. And do you realize that this is the very island? Nobody lives beyond it. There's nothing beyond it but sea. We're looking the sea straight in the face, so to speak. And far behind us are all those people who live on islands much nearer to the mainland. It's a wonderful thought, don't you think?" And Moomin Ch cried, "Yes, Papa, wonderful." And Moomin Mama asked, Can I carry the basket for a little while? Moomin Papa said, oh no, you're not to carry a thing. All you've got to do is to walk straight into your new house. But wait, you must have some flowers to take in with you. Wait a moment. I think Moomin Papa's got a big heart. And he disappeared among the bushes and began to pick some flowers. Moomin Mama looked around. How poor the soil looked. And there were so many stones everywhere, masses of stones all over the place. It certainly wasn't going to be an easy matter to make a garden there. Moomin Troll said, what a sad sound, Mama. What is that? He asked. Moomin Mama listened. She said, yes, that is a sad sound. But it's only the aspen trees. They always sound like that. I don't think Moomin Mama's too sure about the adventure they're on. Tiny, wind-swept little aspen trees were growing between the stones, their leaves rustling in the gentle breeze blowing off the sea. They were trembling violently, and one shudder after another passed through them. The island was different by day. It looked to have turned its back on them, kind of like the cat. It wasn't looking at them the way it had during the warmth of the night. Instead, it was gazing far out to sea. Moomin Papa said, holding flowers, there you are. They're terribly small, but they'll open all right if you put them in the sun. Do you hear that siren? Do you have sirens by your house? We have sirens by here. Now we must push on. Soon there'll be a proper path from the beach right up to the lighthouse, and there'll be a jetty for the boat. A jetty's a place to walk. It's kind of made of usually stones thrown and piled up in one spot and then stretched out like a sidewalk so people can walk along the shore right by the boat and get to the boat. He said, there's so much to be done here. Just think, fancy being able to build all one's life and turn the island into a miracle of perfection. He picked up the baskets and hurried on ahead through the heather toward the lighthouse. In front of them lay age-old rocks with steep and sharp sides, and they stumbled past precipice after precipice, gray and full of crevices and fissures. A lot of words in there. A precipice is a cliff, and a cliff is where the ground just drops off suddenly and sharply, and you could fall over it. It's kind of like when you're at home and you're walking on the sidewalk, and if you step too far to one side, you'll step into the street, and there's a little bit of a drop off. Well, a precipice is a big drop off. And they stumbled past precipice after precipice, gray and full of crevices and fissures. Those are cracks. You need good shoes to walk along there. Moomin Mama thought, everything's much too big here. Or perhaps, maybe I'm too small. The only path was as small and insecure as right then she felt. They groped their way forward together through the boulders and came to the rock where the lighthouse stood, waiting on its heavy feet of concrete. Concrete is rock made by people. And Moomin Papa said, welcome home. Slowly, they turned their gaze to the lighthouse, higher and higher. It seemed to go on forever, white and gigantic. It was simply unbelievable. Right at the top, a cloud of frightened swallows flew dizzily backward and forward. Moomin Mama said weakly, I feel a little seasick. Moomin Troll looked at his father. Moomin Papa climbed solemnly up the lighthouse steps and lifted his paw to take hold of the door. Behind him, little My said, "It's locked." Moomin Papa turned around and stared at her blankly. Little My repeated, "It's locked. There's no key." Moomin Papa pulled the door. He twisted and turned, he knocked, and even gave it a kick. Finally, he took a step backward and just looked at it. He said, "Here's the nail. Quite obviously a nail for the key. You can see it is. I've never heard of anyone who locked a door without hanging the key properly on the nail. Particularly a lighthouse keeper." Moomin Mama said, "Perhaps it's under the steps." It wasn't under the steps. Moomin Papa sat on the rock a little way away with his nose pointing to sea. He said, "Now, everybody keep quiet. Quiet, please. I must have time to think." The air was warmer now, and the southwest wind blew gently over the island. This was the right day, a perfect day for occupying a lighthouse. Moomin Papa was so disappointed. He felt a sinking feeling in his stomach, and he could not collect his thoughts. There was no other place for a key than the nail or under the steps. There were no door frames and no window ledges, no flat stones in front of the steps. Everything around them was smooth and bare. Moomin Papa's brain felt tired. You ever feel like that? He was conscious all the time that his family was standing behind him, waiting in silence for him to say something. Finally, he called out over his shoulder, "I'm going to sleep for a while." Problems solve themselves while one sleeps. The brain works better if one leaves it in peace. He rolled himself in a crevice in the rock and pulled his hat over his eyes. With a great sense of relief, he fell asleep. Moomin Ch went and looked underneath the steps. He said, "There's nothing here except a dead bird." The bird was a tiny, frail skeleton, quite white. He laid it on the steps, where it was immediately blown down the rock by the wind. Immediately interested in this, little My said, "I saw lots of those down there in the heather. Reminds me of The Revenge of the Forgotten Bones. Jolly good story, that." They stood in silence for a while. Moomin Ch asked, "What do we do now?" Moomin Mama said, "I was thinking about that fisherman we met during the night when we were in our boat and he was in his. And he didn't talk much, remember? He must live somewhere on the island. Perhaps he knows something." She opened the sack with the bedding in it and took out the red blanket. She said, "Why don't you cover Papa with this? It isn't good for him to sleep on the rock like that. And then you can go around the island and look for the fishermen. Bring me a little seawater on your way back. There's a good Moomin, thank you. The copper can is in the boat, and the potatoes too." How nice to get moving and have something to do. Moomin Ch turned his back on the lighthouse and wandered away across the island. A sea of red heather covered the slope, and below the rock, it was warm and peaceful. The ground was hard and hot. It smelled good, but not at all like the garden at home. Now that he was alone, Moomin Ch could begin to look at the island and smell it in the right way. He could feel it with his paws and prick up his ears and listen to it. Away from the roar of the sea, the island was quieter than the valley at home, than Moomin Valley. Completely silent and terribly, terribly old. He thought, it isn't an island that'll be easy to get to know. It wants to be left in peace. The heather disappeared in a mossy swamp in the middle of the island, came out of the other side only to vanish in a low thicket of spruce and birch trees. The birch trees were small. It was odd that there wasn't a single tall tree. Everything seemed to grow so close to the ground, groping its way across the rock. It occurred to Moomin that he too should make himself as small as he could. He began to run toward the point. That's the end of the island. Far out on the west end of the island stood a little house made of stone and cement. It was fixed firmly to the rock with lots of iron clamps. Its back was round like a seal's, and it looked straight out into the sea through a tiny little window. The house was so small that you could just about sit in it if you were the right size, and the fisherman had built it for himself. He was lying on his back with his arms under his head, gazing at a cloud moving slowly across the sky. Moomin said, "Good morning. Is this where you live?" The fisherman replied vaguely, which is kind of dreamily, "Only when it's stormy." Moomin nodded seriously. It was just the right way to live if one likes big waves. Sitting in the middle of the breakers are things that are in the water to slow down the waves as they come into shore. The house sitting in the middle of the breakers, he sat there watching the waves as high as mountains coming and going and listening to the sea thundering on the roof. Moomin wanted to ask, "Can I come and watch the waves with you sometime?" But the house was obviously built just for one. Moomin said, "Mama sends her compliments, her hellos. She asked me to inquire about the key to the lighthouse." The fisherman made no answer. Moomin explained, "Papa can't get in. We thought that perhaps you might know where the key..." Silence. Nothing. More clouds appeared in the sky. At last the fisherman turned his head and looked at him with his watery blue eyes. He said, "No, I don't know anything about a key." Moomin asked, "Did he put the light out and just go away?" Moomin had never met anybody before who didn't answer when asked a question. It worried him. It made him feel uncomfortable. The fisherman said, "I can't really remember. I've forgotten what he looked like." Then he got up slowly and puttered off over the rock, gray and wrinkled and as light as a feather. He was very small and had not the slightest desire to talk to anybody. Moomin stood watching the fisherman for a while, then turned and walked back across the narrow strip of land. He went in the direction of the beach where the boat was in order to fetch the copper can. They would be eating soon, and Moomin Mama would make a fire between some stones and lay the meal out on the steps of the lighthouse. Then somehow or other, things would be all right. Okay, gotta stop there. I filled up the video. You tell your mom and dad I say hi, I love them, and Aunt Ellie and I are off now to go babysit your new little cousin. I wish you could meet him soon. Maybe someday soon. Okay, I love you. This has been fun. Bye. See you next time.